We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You are listening to The Underground Marketing Conspiracy, a secret ritual where entrepreneurs acquire highly classified and confidential business knowledge that the top 1% of income earners don't want you to know. And now, your host, Maddie Milligan.
What is going on, my fellow conspirator and conspirators? Welcome to The Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Ooh. Growing up, I watched a ridiculous amount of TV. Not the stuff that you see for free on all the major networks. I would watch some of that from time to time. Never really been a fan of all of these hospital shows and lawyer shows and cop shows and mainstream stuff that you'd see on all the mainstream networks. I would always watch these very underground esoteric things, which is one of the reasons why I called the show The Underground Marketing Conspiracy, because that's kind of part of who I am. I always liked things that were very niche and very esoteric that went against the mainstream. I was never really down with the mainstream. So some of my favorite shows, as I've talked about in the past, my favorite show is Breaking Bad. I absolutely love that show. I think Mad Men is probably number 2 or 3. I've liked a lot of other HBO shows as well, like Game of Thrones. I really enjoyed it at first, and the last season was whatever. The writing was just so... Anyways, at least you can like the music in that show and some of the other things in the acting, but writing in that final season was just... Anyways, let's move on from that before I get very upset about that. But HBO, very high level. Boardwalk Empire, super high level. Oz, very super high level. Rome, Deadwood, absolutely magical TV. The costumes, the writing, the acting, absolutely love these shows. But one show that people, I always tell them to watch, and they always have trouble getting into it, is The Wire. The Wire is, I think it's probably my second or third favorite show of all time. And just to give you an idea in a nutshell, it basically takes place in Baltimore. So Baltimore, Maryland. And there's kind of two sides that you're seeing. You see these cops who are trying to bust this big drug ring within the city of Baltimore. And then it shows all of these characters who are within the drug ring. And you kind of see this professional side of things with the cops, and you kind of get that side of the story. But then there's the other side, which is, again, these guys running this drug ring. So I want to talk about this one character, though, Stringer Bell. And it's played by Idris Elba. Great acting in the show. This dude with this British accent playing this guy from Maryland who has this kind of like gangster hood accent. So well done. And he just plays this character perfectly. And he's kind of the number 2 within the drug ring. There's this main guy, Avon Barksdale, who's like, they call him the king. And then Stringer Bell is kind of like the queen because he's making all the moves within it, right? And he's protecting the king. And Stringer Bell wants to change the way that business is done, right? He wants to legitimize the drug game within the city of Baltimore. And there's all sorts of different things that he does. Like, there's scenes where you see him go to community college at night. Like, he's running this drug organization in the day, and then at night he's going to community college and he's taking courses on macroeconomics. And there's even a scene where like they show him and this professor's giving him the grade, and you see, and he gets an A- on one of the papers. And even then, when he's showing up in person, he's even changing his accent and speaking more professional, right? Doing what's, I think they call it like the white voice, where he's kind of just speaking like a white guy. I think Chappelle came up with that, Dave Chappelle. But he's kind of talking like that. And when you listen to it, it's very professional. Again, he's dressing differently. He's not dressing in kind of like the hood clothes that a lot of these other guys are wearing. But one of the lessons that really resonated with me in the show was essentially their competition is eating up the market, and their product, which is heroin, right? It's basically just become this commodity. So they're trying to figure out a way where they can get back some of their market. And he's talking with his professor in this macroeconomics, and he's asking him some questions. And he's essentially just being like, oh, like what happens when you have this like high demand product and you're the leader in the market? And he's like, well, you have a couple of options. Like, one of them would be you can just buy out the competition. And he's like, all right, well, what if that's not an option? And he's like, well, then, you can rebrand, right? And I don't remember the company off the top of my head that he talks about, but he takes this idea and then runs these little seminars, like these hotel meetings for his crew, right? So you can just imagine all of these guys dressed in like all these Echo and Mecca and Karl Kani, these very baggy clothes, right, with their very thick, heavy Baltimore accents. And Stringer Bell is basically giving them a lesson on what they should do. And he's like, all right, guys, so what do we do, when we have the same product as everyone else, but everyone thinks that we're bad? At the same time, like, you guys all have criminal records. What should you guys do? And then one of them's like, oh, maybe we should change our names. And he's like, there we go. We're onto something, right? And he's like, okay, so when they come and they bust you, give them a fake name. All right, cool. So that's one problem solved. He's like, next thing, like, we have this product which everyone is thinking is the same thing, right? This product with these blue caps. So what are we going to do about that? And then one guy's like, oh, I have an idea. We should change the blue caps to red caps. And another guy's like, hey, like, we should do that, and then each location we can create little fake beef between each other, right? And then force everyone to go to one spot. And then Stringer Bell's like, yeah, that's a smart thinking man right there, right? So rebranding is an ultimate strategy, right? Let's say your company has a bad reputation. You can always choose to rebrand your entire business. And this is kind of what Stringer Bell is getting at. I think The Wire is very interesting too, because one of the copywriting courses I've taken in the past is the Agora Financial copy course system. And it's probably the most complex and dense copywriting course I've ever taken. It took a lot of spare time for me to get through the entire thing and read all the different sales letters they have in that very expensive course. And I've taken other courses. I think the second best one I would say is John Carlton's Simple Writing System. If I were a newbie and I wanted to become a copywriter, I would probably start out with John Carlton's Simple Writing System, because that's going to give you the basics of copywriting. It's going to really teach you how to do proper research, which they do teach in the Agora one as well. But why am I talking about this? So Agora Financial, their headquarters is actually in Baltimore, Maryland, same city where The Wire takes place. And it's weird because when you think of Agora, right, and most people aren't familiar with what they do, this huge publishing firm that creates all sorts of financial letters. They sell stuff in the survival niche. And when you think of a company like that doing millions, like hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, selling these financial newsletters and these smaller, very inexpensive front-end offers, and then selling bigger stuff on their back end to their email lists. When you think of a company like that, like, they do business in the same city. And I've seen some pictures of Maryland. I've watched The Wire. It looks like I could not live there. It looks very scary. There's all these streets and rows of abandoned things, of abandoned houses, where even then in the show, they do all sorts of meetings in these abandoned houses when they want to avoid the cops, right? So essentially with The Wire, I mean, it's so hard to get through those. Some of the characters, you can't even understand what they're saying because of their thick accents, and they use all sorts of stuff. So I would recommend, if you do watch that show, I would totally watch it with closed captions, especially when you're listening to this character, Snoop. She is someone where you cannot understand a word that she's saying. She has this very, very odd accent. But there's a lot you can learn from that show about business, right? And Stringer Bell, he's trying to legitimize the entire drug game in that show. He's pulling all these moves off. Again, he's kind of like, they make an analogy in the show to a chessboard, right? Where they're like, there's the king, there's the queen, there's all the other guys, but then there's the pawns, right? And he's like, the king stays the king. He's like, unless, the game ends, right? Unless the other team basically takes over. And I don't want to give away if you are planning to watch the show, but essentially Stringer Bell is making all these moves, right? And he almost gets into trouble in this one scene, and he's with these three guys, and basically what happens is he's like, yo, like, I'm kind of like the CEO, right? He's like, I'm the CEO, like, running everything, right? He's like, when stuff goes down in the company and something bad happens, he's like, all the other players, right? Like, all the pawns, the rook, the bishop, and the knights, they can go and run and hide in their holes. But he's like, with me, they're still going to see me, right? I'm still going to be the front of the business. So you guys are kind of, embarrassing me with all the stuff that you're doing. So I want you guys to kind of step up your game and be a little bit more professional, right? And I think that's an important lesson as well, because when you think about this, like when you're the CEO, like people think, again, I've talked about this before, people think being the CEO, it's like the most grandiose thing. Sure, you're making a lot of money, but you have so much responsibility, right? It's like a 25-hour a day job. Like even when you're sleeping, you're probably thinking about things, right? You're coming up with ideas, executing different things, seeing different perspectives, taking care of all the people within your company, taking care of all the people who are buying your products, your customers. So I totally recommend at some point in your life, like sitting down, just watching this show, because you will learn a lot from this show about business. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Underground Marketing Conspiracy. If you did, I want you to consider subscribing, maybe even consider going back and listening to a few other episodes. My name is Matty Milligan. You can find out more about me if you go to mattymilligan.com, and I will see you next time on another episode of the Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Woo!